The letter slid under the door like a blade. No knock, no warning, just paper trembling in the midnight draft. Marcia, 68 years old, stood frozen in the silence of her kitchen. One glance at the handwriting and her heart clenched. It was her son's. But inside there were no words of love, no trace of apology, only a cold reminder that she had been left behind. That was the night everything changed. The night a mother decided she was done waiting to be chosen. Before we begin, I invite you to subscribe so you won't miss the good story that might brighten your new day. The first sound was almost nothing, just the whisper of paper dragging across wood. Marcia lifted her head, startled by how sharp it cut through the silence. The old clock on the wall had just struck midnight and the house seemed to hold its breath. She rose slowly, joints aching, and shuffled toward the door. A sliver of white lay trembling on the rug, caught in the cold draft. An envelope, no stamp, no postmark, no polite wrapping of formality. Just one word written in hurried ink, Mom, her son's handwriting. She recognized it instantly. Marcia stood there for a moment, staring down as though the envelope itself might decide to vanish. The wind rattled the window pane. Somewhere outside, a dog barked and then fell quiet. It was the kind of night when every noise feels like a warning. Finally, she bent down and picked it up. The paper felt heavier than it should have. She carried it back to the kitchen table, laid it under the lamp, and sat. Her hands hesitated, resting on the crease. It had been years since David had written her anything by hand. He didn't write letters anymore. He sent reminders, short texts, clipped emails. The fact that he had bothered to put pen to paper now unsettled her. She unfolded it slowly, careful not to tear. 3 short paragraphs. That was all. Mom, we don't understand what you're doing. The kids are confused. Amelia cried. We thought you were just upset, but this feels like something else. If you're trying to punish us, you've made your point. Come home, let's talk, please, David. Marcia stared at the words. They didn't sting, not the way sharp words usually do. These were worse. They were polite, detached, sterile. The kind of words you might use to complain about a late delivery. Not to speak to the woman who had given you life. Not once did he write, I'm sorry. Not once did he say we shouldn't have left you out. Not once did he acknowledge that they had planned an entire family trip, his wife, his children, everyone without her. It was as if her absence mattered only because it made them uncomfortable. Her chest tightened, but she did not cry. She had wasted too many tears over years of small exclusions, holidays that didn't work out this year, birthdays replaced with a 2-line text, dinners where her presence was an afterthought. This letter was only the final proof of what she had already known. They had stopped seeing her a long time ago. She folded the page neatly, pressing the crease flat with her palm. Then, without a sound, she slid it into the drawer beside her chair. The wood closed softly, final, as though swallowing the last shred of her expectation. For a long moment she sat motionless, hands resting on the table. The lamp cast a pool of light around her, leaving the rest of the kitchen in shadow. Her reflection in the dark window stared back, a woman of 68, hair silvered, lines etched deep across her face. To others she might look fragile, to her son she must look dispensable. But tonight, as she studied herself in the glass, she saw something steadier, harder. The letter had not broken her, it had clarified her. She whispered into the silence, her voice low but firm. I'm not leaving to punish. I'm leaving because I'm done waiting to be chosen. The words startled her because they felt true, because they had been waiting years to be said. The wind pushed harder against the door, rattling it on its hinges. Marcia rose, pushed in her chair, and glanced once more at the drawer. She hadn't slammed it shut. She hadn't thrown the letter away. She had folded it, tucked it aside, and chosen silence. It was her first act of rebellion, quiet, unmistakable. Tomorrow, she decided, the world would look different. Tomorrow. She would walk out of this house not as someone's forgotten mother or overlooked grandmother, but as a woman who still had miles left to travel. And for the first time in years, she allowed herself to wonder where those miles might lead. Morning light filtered through the curtains, thin and pale, the kind of light that doesn't warm but exposes. Marcia woke with the strange heaviness of someone who had made a decision in the dark and now had to face it in daylight. The drawer still held the letter. She didn't open it. She didn't need to. Its words were burned into her memory like a brand she hadn't asked for. She boiled water for tea, the kettle's whistle sharp against the silence, and spread a single piece of toast with butter that refused to melt. She chewed slowly, tasting nothing. For years, her mornings had been about preparing, packing lunches when David was little, ironing shirts when Paul was still alive, later baking muffins for Amelia when she stayed over. But this morning was different. For the first time, breakfast was not for anyone else. Just her. The quiet felt strange, not painful, just foreign. By mid-morning, a knock came at the side door, 3 quick taps, confident. Marcia opened it to find Lucille standing there in her oversized sunglasses, a scarf knotted around her throat even though the day was already warm. Lucille had been her friend since high school. The kind of woman who wore jewelry to the grocery store and never apologized for wanting more out of life. "You look like someone who's been drafted into a war," Lucille said, peering over her glasses. Marcia gave a thin smile. "Maybe I have." Lucille stepped inside, her perfume filling the kitchen with the faint scent of violets. Her eyes swept the room, landing on the closed drawer. She didn't ask. She never did. Instead, she pulled a brochure from her bag and laid it flat on the table. "Lisbon," she announced. "Cheap flights, sunlight, pastries that will ruin your hips in the best way possible." Marcia blinked. "Lisbon, yes, Lisbon," Lucille replied. "Unless you'd rather sit here waiting for another letter telling you where you don't belong. Personally, I'd rather eat custard tarts in Portugal." The words made Marcia laugh, a short, surprised sound she hadn't expected to escape her throat. She pressed a hand to her lips as though laughter itself might betray her grief. But Lucille only smiled, satisfied. "I can't just leave," Marcia said finally. "You can," Lucille countered. "You just never let yourself." The room fell quiet. Marcia stared at the glossy photos, streets lined with painted tiles, golden light spilling across riverbanks, old trams rattling up steep hills. Something in her chest stirred. For decades, she had been the one who stayed behind. The one who held the house together, kept the schedules, filled the gaps no one else noticed. She had always said, "Go ahead, I'll be fine," even when she wasn't. Now, with her son's words still echoing in the silence, "If you're trying to punish us, you've made your point," she realized she wasn't trying to punish anyone. She was simply tired of standing in doorways watching life pass her by. Marcia pushed the brochure back toward Lucille. "Book it," she said quietly. Lucille's grin spread wide. "Now that's the Marcia I remember." That afternoon, while the kettle cooled on the stove and the letter remained locked in its drawer, Marcia packed a small suitcase, not everything, just what she needed: comfortable shoes, a cotton dress, the lipstick she'd nearly thrown away years ago. At the last moment, she slipped in a brand new notebook she had bought months before and never used. Its pages were still blank, waiting. As the zipper closed, a strange calm settled over her. She wasn't running away, she was choosing. When the taxi pulled into the driveway the next morning, Lucille was already waiting with 2 oversized paper bags and a look of triumph. Marcia locked the door behind her and slid the key into her purse. She didn't leave a note. She didn't owe anyone an explanation. The air outside smelled of cut grass and exhaust, ordinary and unremarkable. Yet to Marcia, it tasted like freedom. She climbed into the taxi, the door shutting with a soft thud that sounded to her ears like a chapter ending. As the car rolled away, the house grew smaller in the rearview mirror until it was nothing but a shadow, a frame around memories she no longer had to live inside. Marcia looked ahead. The road stretched open, uncertain but alive. For the first time in years, the absence she carried didn't feel like an empty hole. It felt like space waiting to be filled with something new. The plane descended over a city bathed in gold. Lisbon shimmered beneath them, red rooftops scattered like fallen petals, narrow streets curling toward the sea. Marcia pressed her forehead against the window, breath catching at the sight. She hadn't expected wonder to feel this sharp, this immediate. When she stepped off the plane, the air carried the scent of salt and grilled sardines. The terminal buzzed with languages she didn't know, but instead of shrinking back, she leaned into the noise, let it surround her like a song she might one day learn. The first night. They found a guest house tucked between a bakery and a tram line. The walls smelled faintly of yeast and soap, the floor creaked with every step, and Marcia loved it. She stood on the balcony as evening spread across the city. Bells rang from some unseen church, children laughed in the street below, and the sky softened into violet. Lucille handed her a small pastry dusted with sugar. "Pastéis de nata," she said. "One bite and you'll forget every letter that ever cut you." Marcia laughed, the kind of laugh that felt rusty but real, and bit into the custard tart. It was warm, sweet, and gone too soon. The next morning, they wandered without a map. They climbed hills that made Marcia's knees protest, but at the top the city spread wide, tiles in blues and greens, laundry lines strung like flags of ordinary triumph, the river glinting like a mirror of sky. That afternoon they stumbled into a tavern where an old woman sang fado. Her voice was cracked, imperfect, but when she sang of longing, the room stilled. Marcia closed her eyes, listening. She thought of all the years she had swallowed her own longing, folded it small to make room for everyone else's needs. The singer's voice carried across the table like a confession Marcia hadn't known she was waiting to hear. When the song ended, Lucille whispered, "She sounds like she's lived 3 lives." Marcia opened her eyes. Maybe she has. That night a message lit up her phone from Sophie. "Grandma, Mom and Dad say you're upset, but I saw your photo. You looked alive. Can I call you?" Marcia read the words 3 times, her heart tightening, loosening, tightening again. She didn't answer right away, not because she didn't want to, but because she wanted to hold the moment, to feel what it was like to be seen by someone who mattered. 2 days later, the train carried them south into Seville. The city struck her like fire in the bones, not just heat pressing down like a hand, but life thrumming through every street. Orange trees lined the courtyards, their scent fierce and sweet. At night, voices spilled from windows, laughter rolling through alleys. They followed the sound of clapping one evening through a narrow passage that opened into a courtyard lit by lanterns. A group of locals gathered, not for tourists but for themselves. A man strummed a guitar, his fingers rough but certain. A woman danced. She was older than Marcia, at least 70, her hair pinned with a single red flower. Her feet struck the ground with the power of a promise, her arms slicing the air as though claiming space she'd been denied. She did not smile, she did not pose. She simply existed, unapologetic. Marcia could not look away, the rhythm thundered through her chest. For a moment she forgot her age, forgot the letter, forgot everything but the force of presence radiating from that dancer's body. "She's older than we are," Lucille whispered. Marcia's throat tightened. She nodded. She had never seen anything more beautiful. The next day they walked through the gardens of the Alcazar. The walls told stories in tiles and arches, each detail deliberate, each carving patient. Marcia ran her hand along the stone, thinking of all the words she had never spoken, all the disappointments she had swallowed to keep the peace. But as she walked beneath those arches, she realized no one stopped her. No one called her frail. No one asked if she needed a seat. And for the first time in years, she didn't feel fragile. She felt present. That evening at a cafe under a striped awning, Lucille sipped lemonade while Marcia watched the world pass. Couples strolling, children chasing pigeons, an old man reading his newspaper like the world could wait. And there among strangers, Marcia felt it, a stirring, subtle but certain. She was no longer standing at the edge of her own life. She was stepping back into it. The night Seville finally broke her open began with nothing more than a walk. The streets pulsed with summer heat, lanterns glowing against stone walls, voices rising and falling like waves. Marcia and Lucille wandered past shuttered shops until they reached a warehouse near the docks. Music leaked through the open doors, low, urgent, a rhythm that hooked the body before the mind could resist. Inside, the space throbbed with energy. Colored lights cast shadows across the crowd. Couples spun in tight circles, laughter spilling between beats. It wasn't flamenco this time, not tradition, but something younger, faster, insistent. Marcia froze at the edge, her scarf clutched tight in her hand. Lucille grinned, already swaying with the music. "We don't belong here," she shouted over the beat. "Then why does it feel like we do?" Marcia answered. She wasn't sure when the decision settled in her chest. Maybe it had been waiting since Lisbon, or since the gardens of the Alcazar, or since the first night she folded her son's letter into silence. But now, with the music pounding through the floor and the scarf warm in her palm, she knew. "I'm going," she said. Lucille blinked. "Going where?" Marcia lifted her chin. "Out there." Before she could talk herself out of it, she stepped forward, weaving through the crowd until she reached the center of the floor. For a heartbeat, she stood still, the rhythm circling her like a dare. Then slowly, awkwardly at first, she let her body move. Her arms lifted. Her feet stumbled, then found the beat. She wasn't graceful, she wasn't young, but she was alive. A young man brushed past and smiled, not mocking but genuine. He offered a hand. Marcia took it for a single spin, laughed out loud, a laugh that startled even her, and then let go. She didn't need him to carry her, she had her own rhythm. Lucille joined her moments later, silver hoops swinging as they both twirled like girls who had forgotten their age. They danced until sweat clung to their backs and their lungs ached, until time no longer belonged to anyone but them. When they finally stumbled out into the night air, breathless and barefoot, Marcia felt lighter than she had in decades. The scarf she had tied in her hair fluttered loose, bright yellow against the dark street. She touched it, smiling. For the first time, it didn't feel like a borrowed accessory. It felt earned. Later, back in the quiet of the guest house, Marcia sat on the edge of her bed. Her body throbbed with soreness, her knees reminding her of every year she carried. But her chest felt wide open. Her phone buzzed on the nightstand. Another call from David. The screen glowed with his name, then dimmed again and again. Voicemails stacked like unanswered prayers. Marcia picked it up, thumb hovering. She could have listened. She could have pressed play, but she didn't. Instead, she opened the voice memo app. For once, the words came without rehearsal. She pressed record. "David," she began softly. Her voice shook, but she steadied it. "I'm not angry, but I am changed. I spent most of my life waiting to be asked, to be needed, to be seen. Sometimes I was. Mostly I wasn't. I don't say this to hurt you. I say it because it's true. I love you. I always will. But I won't come back to the role you gave me. Not as a backup plan, not as the one you remember when it's convenient. If you want me in your life, it has to be as a whole person. A real one. I hope you understand. Good night." Her thumb hovered again, then pressed send. The message zipped into the air, gone from her phone. Living now in his. Marcia set it down, leaned back on the pillow, and let her eyes close. The music from the bar still hummed faintly in her bones. Her heart felt unsteady but strong, like a drum that had finally remembered its own beat. For the first time in years, she didn't fall asleep waiting for someone else to call her back. She drifted off with her own voice still echoing in her ears. By the time the sun rose over Seville, Marcia's phone had already lit up 26 times. Missed calls, voicemails, the same name glowing on the screen, David. She didn't answer a single one. She sat at a cafe with Lucille, the morning air thick with the smell of oranges and roasted chestnuts. While her friend haggled with a vendor over a basket, Marcia stirred her coffee, watching the foam swirl. She wasn't angry, not anymore. The calls were only proof of what she already knew. Her silence had been louder than anything she could have shouted. When she finally checked her messages, she found one new voice memo. Not from David, from Sophie. "Grandma, I don't know if you'll hear this. Mom and Dad think you're trying to prove something, but I don't. I think you just got tired of being left behind. I would have been too. You looked happy in that photo. Happier than I've ever seen. Just call me. Even if it's only for a minute." The words cracked something open in her chest, even if it's only for a minute. That was enough to make her pick up the phone to let Sophie's voice flood her heart with a warmth no apology could match. Later, back at the hotel, Marcia sat cross-legged on the bed, the yellow scarf folded neatly in her lap. She called. Sophie answered on the second ring, her voice trembling, quick, like she had been holding her breath for days. "Grandma, I'm here." "Sweetheart," a sharp inhale, then the sound of a door closing somewhere in the background. "I was starting to think you'd gone totally rogue." Marcia smiled. "Not rogue, just found something I'd forgotten I had." "What?" "Myself." There was silence on the other end, but it wasn't empty. It was heavy, meaningful. Then Sophie said quietly, "I get it. I think I get it more than Mom and Dad do." Marcia believed her. They talked for 15 minutes about school. About a boy Sophie liked who didn't like her back. About the sketchbook she'd been filling with drawings of cities she wanted to see one day. Normal things, precious things, but the call ended with a question that lingered. "Are you coming back soon?" "I don't know yet," Marcia answered honestly. "But when I do, you'll see me, not the old me you're used to, the real me." Sophie whispered, "Good, that's the one I like best." That night, in the quiet of her room, Marcia received a different kind of message. Not a voice memo, not a missed call, an email from Claire, her daughter-in-law. It began without greetings, without pleasantries, just blunt lines of text. "Helen, we didn't mean to leave you out. We told ourselves you'd be more comfortable at home, that the trip would be easier for the kids without worrying about you. That was a lie. The truth is your age scared us, not because you can't handle things, but because it reminded us of our own limits. I'm sorry, we're sorry. If you ever decide to come back, we'd like to start over. No expectations. Just you as you are." Marcia read it twice, then a third time. She didn't cry, she didn't feel triumphant. She simply sat still, the words pressing into her like a cautious hand. It wasn't enough to heal the wound, but it was the first stitch. The next morning, she folded the scarf around her neck, tied it tight, and walked out into the city with Lucille. She didn't tell her about the email. Not yet. Some truths were better carried in silence, at least until they had time to settle. For years, she had been told she was fragile, replaceable, too much trouble to include. And yet here she was, walking through cobblestone streets under a merciless sun, stronger than they had ever imagined. The cracks had formed not just in her family, but in the story they had written for her. And through those cracks, something new was breaking through. Granada came and went in a blur of arches and stone gardens. Cadiz gave her the sea. Steady and endless, a horizon that whispered she had more years ahead than she once believed. But Marcia knew the journey couldn't stay abroad forever. She had left her house, her family, her silence, but not to vanish. She had left to return stronger, whole. When the plane touched down back home, no one waited at the airport. She hadn't told them she was coming. She didn't want banners or apologies pressed into hugs. She wanted to arrive the way she had left, on her own terms. The taxi wound through familiar streets. Storefronts she had once known stood changed, new signs replacing old ones, cafes gone, fresh paint covering memories. When the car stopped in front of her house, Marcia lingered for a moment before stepping out. The porch was swept. The plants had survived. Life hadn't paused just because she'd gone missing. Inside, the air smelled faintly of dust and lavender. Everything was in its place, every bowl, every frame, yet everything felt different. She was different. She unpacked slowly, stacking clothes with care, then set the yellow scarf across the back of a chair like a banner of victory. 2 days later, the knock came. Marcia opened the door to find David standing there, hands shoved deep in his pockets. His face looked older, drawn as though he hadn't slept in weeks. Behind him, Claire hovered, uncertain. He cleared his throat. "I wanted to come alone, but she insisted." Marcia didn't invite them in right away. She let the silence sit, heavy but not cruel. Finally, she stepped aside. "Come in." The kitchen felt different with them at her table. This was the same place she had folded his letter into silence, the same table where birthdays and homework and late-night talks had once unfolded. Now it felt like neutral ground. No one spoke at first. Claire fidgeted with her ring. David traced a pattern on the wood with his finger. Marcia poured tea, steady and unhurried. and set the cups down. She didn't offer sugar. She didn't smooth the silence. She let them sit in it, the same silence she had endured for years while they forgot her presence. Finally, David lifted his eyes. I didn't want to lose you. His voice cracked, stripped of defenses. Marcia held his gaze. You didn't lose me, you just stopped seeing me. The words landed hard. He flinched but didn't argue. Claire shifted in her chair. We know, we talked about it. We were wrong, her voice faltered. We're sorry. Marcia didn't respond, not yet. Instead, she reached into the drawer by her side. Slowly, deliberately, she pulled out a thin envelope and slid it across the table. David picked it up, confused. What's this? The tickets, she said simply. The ones I canceled. His face drained of color. He didn't open the envelope. He didn't have to. He knew exactly what it meant. I kept them, Marcia continued. Her tone calm but sharp. Not out of spite, out of truth, so none of us forget how easy it was to erase me. The silence that followed was heavier than any argument. Claire's eyes brimmed with tears, but she blinked them back. David swallowed hard, nodding once. Marcia leaned back, hands folded in her lap. If you want me in your lives, it won't be as a convenience. It won't be as the person you call when it suits you. It will be as a person, a whole one. No one argued. No one tried to soften it. They drank their tea, the sound of spoons against porcelain filling the gaps words couldn't yet bridge. It was awkward, it was imperfect, but it was honest. When they finally rose to leave, Marcia didn't follow them to the door. She stayed seated, letting them find their way out. David paused in the doorway, glancing back like a boy who wasn't sure if he'd be allowed back again. We'll try, he said quietly. Marcia didn't smile, she didn't promise, she only answered, I'll see. When the door clicked shut, she exhaled slowly, her chest loosening. The house was quiet again, but not brittle as before. This silence was hers own, chosen, strong. For the first time in decades, she didn't feel like a guest at her own table. She felt like the host of her own life. The days that followed were quiet. Not empty, quiet in the way a field lies still after a storm, damp earth holding new roots. Marcia watered her plants, opened windows, and let air move through the rooms like a guest she had finally remembered to invite. One afternoon, soft knock came at the door. When she opened it, Sophie stood there, a backpack slung over one shoulder, her face pale but determined. Mom doesn't know I'm here, she said. Marcia stepped aside. Then we won't tell her. They sat at the kitchen table, the same place her father had just sat days before. Sophie dropped her backpack with a thud and pulled out a folded sheet of paper. Her hands trembled slightly as she slid it across the table. I made something, she whispered. Marcia unfolded the page. At the top, in Sophie's looping handwriting, were the words, things I refuse to inherit quietly. She read aloud, the belief that women outgrow desire, the idea that aging means fading, the habit of saying I'm fine when I'm not, the silence that comes after someone says you're too much, the shame passed down like furniture, kept because no one knew how to throw it away. Marcia's throat tightened. Her eyes blurred. She looked up at Sophie, who sat rigid, waiting for judgment. You're going to be all right, Marcia said, her voice steady but soft, because you've already decided not to disappear. For a long moment, neither spoke. The sunlight through the window painted the table in gold, touching the paper between them like a benediction. Sophie exhaled, a shaky breath that sounded like release. I started it after you left. I thought, if you could choose yourself at 72, maybe I can learn to do it at 16. Marcia reached across the table, covering her granddaughter's hand with her own. The silence this time wasn't heavy. It was shared. That evening they cooked together. Sophie chopped vegetables too quickly, nearly cutting her finger. Marcia steadied her hand, guiding the knife with patience. They moved around the kitchen like a dance, awkward at first, then fluid, each adjusting to the other. Over dinner, Sophie asked, do you think Dad understands yet? Marcia chewed slowly, considering. Understanding takes time, but cracks have started. Once a wall cracks, it never stands the same again. Sophie nodded. I saw him reading your message. He printed it out. It's on the kitchen table. He hasn't moved it for days. Marcia smiled faintly. She imagined David sitting there, staring at the paper the way she had stared at his letter months ago. two silences finally meeting in the middle. Later that night, after Sophie had gone home, Marcia pulled out her own notebook. She flipped to a fresh page and wrote at the top, "Things I choose to pass down," she wrote. "That silence is not strength when it erases you. That leaving doesn't mean abandonment, it means breathing. That forgiveness can be given slowly like sunlight returning after winter. That women at any age are allowed to want to move to be seen." She paused, pen hovering, then added, "That my granddaughter is braver than I ever was at 16. When she closed the notebook, she felt the weight of it. Pages filling with truths she had once swallowed, now written down for someone else to carry forward. The inheritance was no longer just property or money or family roles. It was voice. It was choice. And for the first time, Marcia knew she had already given her granddaughter the most valuable thing she owned: permission to live unapologetically. Sunday evening arrived with the weight of unspoken promises. Marcia carried a lemon tart in a small white box, her scarf tied loosely at her neck. The walk to David's house felt longer than she remembered, each step measured, steady, her breath calm but deliberate. When she reached the door, Claire opened it. No quick smile, no overeager embrace, just a quiet step aside. "Come in," she said. The dining room had changed. New art on the walls, furniture rearranged. It wasn't her house, not anymore. Not even a place she belonged by default. And strangely, that truth didn't sting. She was a guest now, and that felt right. Sophie leapt up from the table and kissed her cheek. "I made salad," she whispered like a secret. "Don't tell Mom if it's bad." They sat. Dinner was simple: roast chicken, bread, the salad Sophie had fussed over. Conversation stumbled at first, filled with pauses too long, spoons clinking louder than necessary. David asked about her trip. Claire offered seconds she didn't take. Sophie filled the air with small jokes, determined to keep the silence from collapsing. When dessert came, Marcia set the tart in the center. Its sharp lemon scent cut through the awkwardness, bright, almost cleansing. She sliced carefully, handed pieces around, and took the last one for herself. It was David who finally broke the deeper silence. His voice was low, rough. "I read your notebook." Marcia looked up, eyebrows lifting. "What notebook?" "The one in the photo Sophie showed me." He hesitated, then added, "It hurt." She held his gaze. "Good." His brow furrowed. "Surprised." "Good," she repeated, "because it means you finally heard me." For a moment, the only sound was the faint hum of the refrigerator. Then David nodded slowly, the way a man accepts a truth he can't unhear. Claire cleared her throat. "We've talked a lot about things we want to do better. We don't know how yet, but we're trying." Marcia didn't offer comfort. She didn't smooth over their discomfort. "I'm not here for promises," she said evenly. "I'm here to see if you're learning." No one argued, no one excused. Sophie reached into her pocket, unfolded a page, and began to read aloud. Her own list. "My grandma taught me that disappearing quietly is a slow kind of death. That staying soft isn't the same as staying silent. That loving someone doesn't mean becoming small for them. That women don't owe their energy to the comfort of others. That it's okay to outgrow your place at the table and demand a new one." Her voice shook, but the words filled the room like a bell rung clear. Marcia blinked hard, her throat tight. For the first time, she didn't feel alone in her truth. When the meal ended, Claire began clearing dishes. David helped. Sophie poured more tea. Marcia leaned back, hands folded in her lap, watching the quiet unfold. Not brittle, not tense. Earned. At the door, David lingered. He didn't reach for her, didn't try to force closeness. He simply said, "I know it'll take time." "I have time," Marcia answered. Then she pulled a thin envelope from her bag and handed it to him. "What's this?" "A copy of the tickets, the ones I canceled." He stared at it, breath shallow. "I kept them," she said softly, "not to punish, to remind us all how easy it was to erase me. We don't forget things like that, we learn from them." He nodded, slipping the envelope into his pocket. They didn't hug, but they stood close, closer than they had in years. Like people who might one day understand each other without explanations. Back home, Marcia undressed slowly. She laid her earrings on the dresser, folded her scarf with care. She studied her reflection in the mirror, older, yes, lines etched deep, but her eyes clear, her shoulders upright, not tired, not invisible. She opened her notebook one last time. On the final page she wrote, "Things I no longer apologize for, wanting space, wanting more, saying no. Leaving quietly, returning louder." And at the bottom, in small, deliberate script, "I was never too old. I was just never asked if I still dreamed. Now I don't wait to be asked. I go." She closed the notebook, set it beside the window, and listened to the night. The world outside hummed with ordinary life, cars in the distance, a dog barking, the faint rustle of leaves. Marcia smiled. For the first time in decades, she wasn't waiting to be chosen. She had chosen herself. And that, she knew, was her quiet victory. The house was quiet when they left, but it was no longer the brittle silence of before. It was a softer hush, like a pause between verses in a song still being written. Marcia knew not everything had been solved, not every wound had closed, but she no longer needed perfection to feel whole. She had reclaimed her voice, passed her courage to the next generation, and reminded her family that love without respect is just an empty gesture. Healing wasn't loud, it wasn't quick, it was steady, like roots pushing back into the earth. And maybe that is the lesson for all of us. Your worth does not vanish because others fail to see it. Sometimes the bravest act is choosing yourself and letting the world adjust. So I ask you, have you ever felt invisible in your own home, your own family? What did you do to take your place back at the table? Share your thoughts in the comments. Your story might be the light someone else needs. And if you find this story meaningful and want to help us share these important values, please subscribe to our channel so you won't miss the next inspiring story. Together, we can build a strong community full of potential and a spirit of justice.